And with that, and with no further ado, I move on to David. David, you please tell Tali when you want the text put up on the screen and when you want us to see.
I'm doing the text along.
And with that, I leave you for the time being.
Okay. Well, thank you very much indeed, Alon. And thank you. Can you hear me okay, everyone? Yeah. Good.
We can probably hear you a little better if you were closer to the mic. You're not
closer to the mic now. Is that closer to the mic? Let's see. I will actually do that. Is that better?
Yeah. If the computer's on your lap, it could be a little wobbly. Questions of
it's on a sort of desk thing on my lap. Yes, it's made of wood, so it's not wobbly.
The lap. So don't get too excited when you talk. So lest we think you're shaking all over, and we'll think you're charismatic or something. Okay.
Okay. Yeah. Well, Alon, as Alon said, what Alon invited me to do was to talk about really Christmas and incarnation in relation to the value of the human being and associated things in Christian terms. And the obvious text for this is the one that we will soon see on screen, which is the prologue of the Gospel of John. And I've extended it a bit into some sections of the rest of John chapter 1 as well. I mean, this is something, those of us Christians who have been attending carol services, which are certainly in this country one of the main ways in which one leads into Christmas, singing Christmas carols and so forth. There's a basic pattern which has a range of readings, and the readings all culminate with the prologue of John's Gospel. And that is because that is seen as one of the most fundamental statements of the core theological meaning of Christmas, and the birth of the baby. Even though it doesn't mention the birth of the baby Jesus, it is the culmination which relates. And when you've seen the other readings, it is like a culmination of all the readings that there are in that carol service. I've been through no less than 3 of them over the last few weeks, so I've had many experience of this. But it is also perhaps the single most influential short text in the history of Christian thought over the last 2,000 years. And that has all sorts of implications. But I'm not going to go into the fascinating history of its reception and discussion and so forth. But what I'd like now to do is, Peter, if you could put up the text, and then we'll read it through. So I will.
Yes.
Yes, good. I will simply read it through. And Alon, just tell me, when would you like me to stop? These things, are of infinite.
Never, David, never.
Yeah, I know. Yes, that's the danger with Irishmen. So just give me a precise time when you want me to.
We said 30 minutes.
Yeah. Okay. So in about, well, say 25 to, yes, in my time. Yeah. Good. I'll try to do that. Let me just read this first of all. And what I've done in this text is to highlight in bold the things that I'll especially pay attention to in it. But here it comes. Now, John's Gospel is usually seen as the 4th Gospel to have been written. It's very different from the other 3 Gospels, often called the Synoptics. But it's also seen as I suppose you could say, the most matured gospel, the most, the one that's had decades of thought put into it, reflecting on all these things. And I think John, the author of the Gospel of John, about which there's all sorts of discussions, but I'm not going into that, the author of the Gospel of John did know the other Gospels as well, and was consciously trying to lead you deeper into them and also help you to reread them and reread him in their light. So, but here comes. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. He was in the beginning with God. All things came into being through him, and without him not one thing came into being. What has come into being in him was life, and the life was the light of all people. The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness did not overcome it. There was a man sent from God whose name was John. He came as a witness to testify to the light, so that all might believe through him. He himself was not the light, but he came to testify to the light. The true light, which enlightens everyone, was coming into the world. He was in the world, and the world came into being through him, yet the world did not know him. He came to what was his own, and his own people did not accept him. But to all who received him, who believed in his name, he gave power to become children of God, who were born not of blood or of the will of the flesh or of the will of man, but of God. And the Word became flesh and lived among us, and we have seen his glory, the glory as of a Father's only Son, full of grace and truth. John testified to him and cried out, "This was he of whom I said, he who comes after me ranks ahead of me, because he was before me." From his fullness we have all received grace upon grace. The law indeed was given through Moses. Grace and truth came through Jesus Christ. No one has ever seen God. It is God, the only Son, who is close to the Father's heart, who has made him known. And then I won't go into the rest of that. That's the end of the prologue, and it's just to be able to view the whole prologue. That's very helpful, just to see it like that. Now, what's happening in this? There's so many things. I mean, the piles on my study floor of all the books on the prologue, you know, which they're absolutely endless, and one can't go into all of them. There's so many issues in this, but I just want to say a few very basic things about it. First of all, that I see this as a sort of the basic principles of a Christian worldview, you know, according to the New Testament. That, and what I see as the key elements in that are, first of all, in the first 5 verses, what one sees is, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. This is about the deepest meaning imaginable. It's about God and all things. All things came into being through him. In other words, all life, all people are involved in this. But there's also a radical realism about the fact that the light shines in the darkness, and but the darkness did not overcome it. I mean, it doesn't say the darkness has stopped, as we all know. It certainly has not. But it does say that the darkness does not have the last word. In other words, that it is a fundamental statement of hope for our universe, for in relation to all reality. But also, I think it's terribly important that that all things, all people are part of this. And you'll notice the true light which enlightens everyone. I mean, that, in other words, the horizon for understanding this, and of course the understanding can come from so many diverse quarters, diverse religions, diverse cultures, and so forth. But the horizon that this invites us into is one in which every piece of creation, every insect, all things, the whole of creation, every single person really matters, has been created by a God who, and then if we jump to the very end, we see the deepest secret for John's gospel of this God. No one has ever seen God. It is God, the only Son, who is close to the Father's heart. That's, as the rest of John's gospel showed, this is the love at the heart of the universe. That, in other words, that the framing of Jesus in this is, first of all, the deepest possible meaning relating to all reality. So therefore one needs to think in relation to the whole of reality, and secondly, the deepest love that is expanded later in the gospel to that love is one of the deepest themes of the Gospel of John. So deep meaning deep love, that there is deep truth in other words, we can be confident that there really is meaning to be found, even if there's darkness and we don't have an overview of it. And there is also an assurance that there is love at the heart of the universe. And of course, then the center of this text, the verse that's central, is the one that I put in bold there, verse 14. And the Word became flesh and lived among us, and we have seen his glory, the glory as of a Father's only Son, full of grace and truth. In other words, that has become vulnerable, mortal flesh. Now, this is, the Christian surprise, if you like, that it's news. It's not a deduction from something. It's the claiming is that this is an event, a new person, that's why, for example, in verse 7, you'll see he came as a witness to testify to the light. The only way you can know news is by hearing testimony to it and trusting testimony. And there's another big cry about testimony a bit further on, that this was he who comes after me ranks ahead of me. He testified to him and cried out. So this is new. It's why the gospel simply means good news, and so this is the person who is at the heart of this, and the Word became flesh, and it's vulnerable, as I say, vulnerable mortal flesh, a baby. And we have seen his glory, but this involves rethinking glory as well. And I'll come back to that later, that what is it if the glory is in terms of a baby, a human, a vulnerable baby who grows up, who teaches, who heals, who feeds, and so forth, but then, of course, who undergoes suffering and death, and then, of course, is resurrected from the dead. What's happening in that? Now, the word "happening" is it doesn't occur in this translation, but there are 9 times in this prologue that the verb ginomai, parts of the verb ginomai are used. It's not always translated the same, but came into being through him, happened through him, and without him not one thing came into being. What has come into being in him was life. And I just want to meditate on what it means when a person happens, when both life and death happen to a person, but a particular person happens to life and death and evil and all the things that life throws at us. I mean, that is the fundamental thing about John's gospel, as I see it, that this person born as a baby grows up and goes through life and death, but they are not the end. That who this person is the clue to what happens. Now, let me just give an analogy. It's a very distant. Any analogies to these are always going to be distant, but but I was reading somebody writing about this just recently, who said, just think of Nelson Mandela, to whom apartheid happened, and who was in prison for years and years and years. But he also happened to apartheid, this mutual happening where who he was really deeply mattered to the to the whole event. And the more I go on in life, the more I think that the situations where we're in, we are all being invited to happen to situations that have happened to us, so to speak, and what happens in those is absolutely crucial. And it seems to me that John's gospel is a gospel that above all stresses who Jesus is. There's a very remarkable poem by Denise Levertov, she's one of my favorite poets of the 20th century, in which she meditates on what's happening in the death of Jesus later on in the crucifixion of Jesus. And essentially, it's at the heart of her poem. For those of you who want it, I've done a commentary on the Gospel of John, and the whole poem is quoted there. But at the heart of what's happening in that event for her is that the suffering is happening to him, but who he is, his oneness with God, is the crucial thing in what's in the meaning of that event. And what this prologue, it seems to me, is saying is that God is free. One of my favorite Irish poets is Patrick Kavanagh of the 20th century, Patrick Kavanagh, and he says God must be allowed to surprise us. And he and it seems to me that this is the, if you like, the Christian claim to a surprise, that what happens in this person is that God is free to express who God is and to give who God is in the form of a baby, in the form of a person, a particular person. Now, there are all sorts of analogies, of course, to that in other traditions and so forth. I'm not doing comparative things at the moment, but I think it is at the heart of our of Christian faith that that God is free to express who God is, the Word of God made flesh, and to give who God is in love. Self-giving, self-expression is at the heart of this. But what happens in that is that this person is utterly in solidarity, both with God and with humanity, and that it really, really matters that both of those are true for Christianity. That's what incarnation, it seems to me, is about in Christianity. And it doesn't mean that there's a simple sort of triumphalism or anything like that. That what it means is solidarity. It's utter vulnerability to the point of death, but that is not the last word, and that what emerges from that is the risen Jesus Christ breathing his Spirit. And then, and this is the challenge for those of us who are Christians, that in John's Gospel, when Jesus, the resurrected Jesus, he appears to his disciples and first of all says, "Peace be with you," and shows them the marks of his crucifixion. And in other words, this is still part of his identity. And then again says, "Peace be with you," and then breathes the Spirit into them and gives them their vocation, which is that they are being sent as he was sent. As the Father sent me, so I send you. And I think what that means is for that one is called to happen to situations wherever one is in the way in which he was. One is sent as Jesus was sent as a Christian. And I know, again, there's so many analogies to this in other traditions, but what I want to just talk about now is that to go back to that word of glory. We have seen his glory. John, it really redefines glory in the way he tells, the narrative, the drama of Jesus. The whole thing is framed in the concept of glory again and again and again. I had a fascinating engagement with Alon about this in the course of a book I was co-authoring recently. That right from the start, it says, "We have seen his glory," in that crucial verse in 14. And the glory is, of course, seen in somebody who suffers and dies, and who serves, and who washes feet, who, that in other words, it's a redefinition of glory, in line, of course, with an awful lot of other things in script in the Bible, but that the when Jesus is on the night before his death, in John's Gospel, there's the longest prayer that he does in the whole of the New Testament, in John 17, and it begins with this concept of the mutual glorification of him and his Father, and then that glory is shared. He prays for the sharing of that glory later on. And just the thing that has gone deep, one of the things that's gone deepest for me in relation to this recently has been when I was in Tübingen University with Peter Oakes. Some of you will know Peter Oakes, so OCHS. He and I were involved in the co-founding of Scriptural Reasoning. I mean, a practice that began with Muslims, Christians, and Jews, and now is done worldwide in all sorts of settings with a range of other religions as well. Basically, reading short portions of our scriptures together in conversation, in dialogue. But Peter was in Tübingen University to be awarded a prize by the University of Tübingen for his philosophy and his work in scriptural reasoning. And he spoke about his teacher, David Halivni, who was came through Auschwitz and other camps during the 1940s. And survived those, but he had memorized the whole of Talmud, and he became a professor of Talmud in Columbia University and a leading Talmudist in America, well, globally. But Peter asked him at one point how did his prayer come through the Shoah? What had happened? And the prayer that he said he had focused on again and again was, I think it's in the Rosh Hashanah liturgy, God and God of our ancestors, reign over all the world in your full glory. Now, this meditation, that what it means to desire the glory of God, I think that's right at the climax of what Jesus was desiring, and those three questions that come in the later part of this that I have. If you just go down the text a bit to the three key questions that come in as Jesus forms a community of learners are: who are you? That's addressed first to John the Baptist, but he turns it round to say, who is Jesus? And the who question of Jesus dominates the rest of the Gospel of John. But then the other two questions are what are you looking for? What do you desire? The question of desire, and the question of where are you staying? Where are you at home? The question of home. Identity, desire, and home are the three absolutely key questions, but they all come together in that final prayer of Jesus in chapter 17 in relation to the theme of glory. And how crucial I have found it in all my interfaith engagements, that I think I'd call it that the holiness of interfaith engagements is there in whether fundamentally the most fundamental thing is that it is done for God's sake, for the sake of God's glory, and how that is, and that the opening of the core prayer for Christians, the Lord's Prayer, is, hallowed be your name, the sanctification of the name, and it seems to me that we have seen his glory leads in to a centering on the glory of God, which enables one then to be daring in one's learning within that horizon of God and all reality, to be able to face the truth, whatever the truth is, to be able to love as daringly as this, because death is not the worst thing that can happen to you. and to be able to pray and glorify God above all, and to orient everything towards a God of glory who is also, of course, a God of peace. Now, there's many other practical things that can flow from this, but I think I'll end there, and I hope that's said a little bit about it. But one of the core things, just to in what I wanted to get across, was this sense that we are all in situations where situations are happening to us and we are happening to situations. What is our vocation in those situations, it seems to me? And you know, that I think with Halivni, it is that deep desire that that God will reign in glory. Over to you, Alon.
Thank you, David, for, can I say, glorious presentation. So thank you. I'm going to pass the, well, many questions have been raised here. The question of God as child, light, what it means for us, how we share in that, by implication, maybe I'm going to push you just so that the message, because you've said so much, especially the glory, I'm going to ask you to give us a 2-minute addendum. What does this mean for us as we see other people in the world? And what does it mean for us in the context even of a war? The fact of everything you've told us. In other words, you've given us the broader context running from the prologue up to the conclusion in chapter 17. What are we to make of it in terms of how we view other people? What are we to make of it in terms of the current challenges?
Well, I suppose the usual way of doing that is, you know, if we are created in the image of God, you know, in the image of a God of glory like this, then each person is just utterly, utterly, utterly precious. You know, there's no qualification about that at all. That is, you know, and that has, you know, I mean, endless implications, as you know, and that, and but I suppose also. You know, it's what it means in how we see people, you know, to see people as actually in the image of a God of glory, of love, of truth. And that is the truth of every single person that we meet, and every single person in history as well. It is almost unimaginably difficult to take that in, isn't it? To see people like that. I mean, just to take an existential thing for me, you know, that my wife co-founded a little community of friendship for people with and without learning disabilities, you know, and that has been just the most extraordinary revelation of, you know, of precisely this, that people who one had not known and related to as friends, are now part of a friendship group, and who are, you know, in a way that was unimaginable in advance. One just understands the glory of people, the beauty of people, you know, and that community, and how that community operates. You know, a community of friendship among people who would never have dreamt of being friends with each other before. I mean, that's part of what it is, but obviously it also has huge implications for all situations of conflict. Well, let me give another practical one. I'm involved in the Rose Castle Foundation, which you can Google if you know, those of you who are interested. But it's a centre for reconciliation and interfaith engagement in Cumbria, in England, centred on a renovated castle. And what we do is we form people as reconcilers. We don't go into the front line of of conflict situations, but we gather people from different sides of conflicts, many of them interfaith, with interfaith dimensions, but also other ones, and and try to form them to be the sort of people who can relate to each other across those divisions. And that's a long-term formation in various habits of reconciliation, which we have. We have 12 habits that we focus on mainly in that. And I think that's, when we were trying to discern what we wanted to do, it was partly, well, we want to form the people who will be involved in situations long term. In other words, the, so to speak, the Mandelas of this world. I mean, that's not somebody people can necessarily imitate, but that to happen to situations in the conflict situations that they're involved in, and to be formed for those. And in order to do that, you have to actually, basically relate to your enemies as people who are fully human. You have to know their stories. You have to, try to empathize. You have to try to engage with them in a whole range of ways. I won't go on in that, but I hope that's just a little bit of a hint of, the sort of things that for me existentially, in terms of, the people with and without learning disabilities and in conflict situations where this issue of that people are just utterly, utterly precious to God, and therefore should be to us.
Thank you, David. Let me take it on to Swamiji. And the key task was to think about incarnation in terms of what it means to being human and what it means for us to be human. And there's plenty of instances of that in the Hindu tradition. And Swamiji, who is very capable of abstracting message from that, is now going to do that for us. Thank you, Swamiji. I think, Tali, you should just profile Swamiji alone.
So the subject is incarnation. Karna means flesh. We talk about carnality and so on. And word made flesh. Just now it was read out from John's Gospel. God incarnates in flesh and blood and behaves like a human being. The Hindus believe that he comes down as a human being. It's called avatara. Avatara, ava means down, tarana means coming down. So God, as it were, comes down as a human being. Why? In the Gospel of Ramakrishna, there is a discussion about why God comes down as man. This is a statement made by the writer of the Gospel, Mahendranath Gupta, a recorder. It says, unless God comes as man, man can never ascend to God and know him. He comes down, as it were, to lead us to his own divine abode so that we may be able to know him. St. John's Gospel is very dear to Swami Vivekananda. When he was in America, the Thousand Island Park near New York, he got about 12 disciples of his like Jesus and taught them intensely for a month or so. And on the first day of his instruction, he brought the John's Gospel and said, since you are Christians, we'll begin with the Gospel of John. And he read through some of them and said, the first 24 lines of the John's Gospel contains the most profound philosophy. In the beginning was the Word was with God, and the Word was God. The Hindu calls this Maya because the power of God. That's the statement of Swami Vivekananda. This word perhaps could be likened to the Om in Hinduism. And Hinduism believes that the entire creation came from the word. There's huge discussions in various philosophical schools in the Hindu religion, very abstruse, some of them, trying to find out the connection between the word and the thing, the word and its meaning. Very much like the linguistic philosophers like Wittgenstein in the West So the entire creation has come from that word called Om. And Om is the essence of all the Vedas. The four Vedas, as you know, the entire Veda has been classified into four Vedas: Rig Veda, Sama Veda, Yajur Veda, and Atharva Veda. And the essence of all the Vedas is one letter Om. Sarve Veda Yat Padamamananti Tapamsi Sarvana Chayad Vadanti Yadichando Brahmacharyam Charanti Tattvapadam Sangrahena Bravimi Om Ityetat. In the Kathopanishad, the instruction is given that which is the essence of all the Vedas, and for realizing which great penance and austerities are performed by spiritual seekers, that I will tell you, and that is the word Om. In the beginning was the word. Word was supposed to be the beginningless word. And the Hindus believe, and the saints and sages over the millennia have experienced, the Om is a sound which eternally exists. It's called the Anahata Dhvani. Ahata means struck. Anahata means unstruck. I strike and a sound is produced. So can sound be produced without striking? Om is supposed to be that word, that sound which is anahata, unstruck sound. Since it is unstruck, it cannot have a beginning. Since it doesn't have a beginning, it cannot have an end. So the beginningless, endless sound, therefore, has to eternally exist, and therefore beyond time. The timeless, eternally existing sound Om is the source of all creation. And the incarnation represents Om. And therefore, in every mantra, the mystic syllable representing any deity, Devata, Om is uttered first. Every deity is invoked by uttering Om. And the meaning and the glory of Om is contained in many of the Upanishadic and other texts, the greatest of them being the shortest Upanishad called the Mandukya Upanishad. It says Om is everything, and the Om is Brahman, and this Brahman is the Atman. That's the formula, equation that they give. Now, the incarnation is a very strange phenomenon in every religion, including Hinduism. How can the infinite and the absolute, who God is, we believe, can come down into the relative plane and come as a finite human being? Of course, Hinduism does not confine the incarnation only to a human form. It can have any number of forms. There's supposed to be 10 divine incarnations, Dashavatara, starting from the fish, the Varaha, the pig, and so on. So there's an evolution. Then it becomes a dwarf, Vamana, a small baby. Then is a full-blown Rama and Krishna are supposed to be the greatest manifestation. It's the manifestation. Is it possible by the finite to be confined in the infinite, be confined in the finite? Once again, a lot of philosophical and spiritual discussions have taken place. What do you mean by finite? What do you mean by infinite? Swami Vivekananda has a remarkable lecture called The Open Secret. He used to give very startling titles for his lectures. The Open Secret, in which he says, you take a small grain of sand, go deeper and deeper, deeper into it, analyze it completely, you'll find that it is moving into the infinite. The borderline between the infinite and the finite, the absolute and the relative, is getting erased when you go deeper into consciousness. This is the idea of the microcosm-macrocosm equation, which is very famous in science, mathematics, and physics, as well as in the philosophy and Hindu religion. The microcosm is you, the human being, small little person encased in this body and mind. And the macrocosm is the infinite being beyond, at the same time, is immanent. The idea is, although God is transcendent, beyond the body and the mind, beyond the intellect, beyond space, time, and causation, at the same time, he pervades the universe, is omnipresent, and he is immanent, manifesting as every being, every particle in this universe. So on the one side, you can intuit God inside yourself, in the deepermost consciousness, which most of the mystics in the world have done in all the religions. On the other hand, you can realize the transcendental reality beyond the mind and the body, beyond space, time, and causation. In the 4th chapter of the Bhagavad Gita, just like the Bible you have, the Bhagavan tells Arjuna, I'll bring the text we quickly got the text also for you to just see. Or can you enable me to share it on the screen?
Yes, I can make you a co-host.
Bhagavan Sri Krishna tells his dear disciple Arjuna, this is the Lord's statement in the Bhagavad Gita. This immortal yoga, I taught it first to Vivaswan. Vivaswan is the sun god. Vivaswan taught it to Manu. Manu taught it to Ikshvaga. There's a series. And as it descended down, slowly the power of the yoga was lost. This is called entropy in physics. If you leave a system unattended, by lapse of time, the whole thing will slowly degenerate and collapse. This is time. Time erodes everything. He says it got eroded. Yogo nashta parantapa. It got lost. Then I have come to revive this. This is the purpose of incarnation. Incarnation comes down so that he rejuvenates, revivifies religion and the path to salvation by humanity. Then he says, same yoga now I'm teaching you because you are dear to me, you are my disciple, you are my friend. Then Arjuna is flabbergasted next to Arjuna is completely confused. Oh Lord, you were born the other day, but Vivaswan and the Manu and all of them you talk about were eons ago, millennia ago. How can I know you taught them? Then he says, oh Arjuna, we have gone through endless lives. You don't remember any of them, but I remember. So, then he says, though birthless and deathless, the Lord of all beings as well, I, the eternal being, take birth by my inherent mysterious power called Atma Mayaya, employing the pure and sattva aspect of a material nature, Prakriti. This is the secret of the incarnation which the Lord himself reveals. I have no birth and death. I eternally exist, just like Jesus showed that he is deathless to his disciples. But I come down again and again to show the path of spirituality to humanity. How do I do that? That's a great mystery. by a mysterious power, which is called Atma Maya. Atma means one's own. Maya means that which is mysterious power, which is pure sattva aspect. In Sankhya theory, sattva, rajas, and tamas are three qualities of all the creatures and all the beings and objects. Sattva is the pure, dazzling, holy, and tamas is dark, and rajas is in between. So taking hold of a pure sattvic quality, which is my own power, I body myself forth. What is the purpose for which I come? Yada yada hi dharmasya glanirabhavati bharata abhyuthanam adharmasya tadatmanam sajamyaham. The most famous verse, every Hindu child recites it. Whenever there is a decline of dharma and ascendance of adharma, that means when virtue subsides and evil forces take over, I manifest myself in a body in order to protect the good people and destroy evil. And with the establishment of religion or dharma, I am born again and again. Arjuna is still not able to understand what he is trying to say. Then he says, "Oh Arjuna, Janma karma cha me divyam." My birth and my life are all divya. Divya is a very interesting word. Diva dhatu means to shine. The word divinity in Christianity perhaps comes from the same dhatu, div, divine. Divinity means to shine, to remove all darkness. So the truth about me is divyam. The truth.
Swamiji, I realize that we need another 2 minutes for you to wrap up. So just for you to be aware of that.
Yeah. So my birth is divine, which cannot be understood by the human mind. And a person who knows me like this will not be born again. This once again is very interesting. How can you get released if you know the Lord is beyond and he has no bondage? The beauty is, why does incarnation come down? He creates infinite themes for meditation. The Bhagavatam, this is mentioned, what is the purpose of the incarnation? The purpose is, he comes down as a human being with whom we can relate. When humans think of God, they have to think of him as an extraordinary human being. This is a psychological fact on which the philosophy is built. Swami Vivekananda said, our perception of the reality depends on our perception about ourselves. The glory was mentioned by the John's Gospel. We share the glory of God, and unless I think of myself as glorious and divine, I can't think of God as divine. Swami Vivekananda funnily says, if all the fishes in the universe come together and think of God, they will think of God as a huge fish. All the buffaloes in the universe come together and think of God, they will think of God as a huge buffalo. So when man is conditioned by his human character, and he has to think of God as a human being until he realizes his own divinity, transcends his humanity, and humanity fades into divinity, dovetails into the divine form, and he realizes himself as the divine, then he becomes close to God. There's an interesting expression in the puja, the worship of God in Hinduism. Devo bhutva devam vajet. You become God in order to worship God. The spirit alone can worship the spirit and never matter. This is the secret of incarnation, very briefly, in Hinduism.
Thank you, Swamiji. I'm very grateful for that succinct summary. And I'm due to offer a response, and I will offer the response precisely listening to this fascinating conversation that really deserves an entire day to unpack and not less than an hour. I'm going to divide my comments into three. The first is to query some of the statements that David made. The second is to reflect on Judaism in view of the difference between what David and what Swamiji said. And the third is to revisit our concerns on the dignity of the human person in view of the conversation we've just had with these two sages. I begin with comments on David. I want to say that about 40 years ago, maybe a little less, or maybe not so much less, I wrote my PhD on the notion of God in Israel as Father and Son. So I studied all the rabbinic sources on children. One of the distinctions I came across was in analyzing various rabbinic parables was the question of when one is talking about a grown-up son and when one is talking about a young child. Because I've been sensitized to that issue through my prior work, I looked at the gospel text that David walked us through. And I want to query and even challenge the argument that there's reference here to a baby. Now, any of you who've received my Christmas greeting for this year will know that I focused on this notion of baby. So the issue is not childbirth and the meaning of vulnerability in babyhood in and of itself. The issue is, what does this text say? And the text reads just as well by talking about the personhood of Jesus taking form, coming into incarnation. And I do not see as evident the argument from babyhood. The point, of course, is that if you're talking about adulthood, then you're either talking about the teaching, as would be an analogy to what Swamiji spoke about, or you're talking about the life itself. But it's not that vulnerability per se. This was point one that I wanted to raise. Second point is that I made a count of how many times the word glory appears and how many times the word light appears. And light appears in this passage 3 times as much as glory. And I consequently want to ask, what would be the most useful term for us to describe here the incarnation coming? Is it that glory comes into reality or that light is incarnated, which of course also goes to this particular reading of the prologue to John as a commentary on Genesis 1, which is not my own innovation, something that's well known. Obviously, David's more than familiar with it. To what extent this is really an emphasis on light. Now, where the difference comes in is when we look at the question of what the meaning of it all is. And it seems to me that this text is much broader than just to say the image of God. When I asked David about, so what does this mean for us? He says, well, the image, he answered the image of the glory of God. I think there's a statement that's larger in 2 ways. A, I don't think it's focusing on the human person only. It's focusing on all of life. So it's a statement of life, and all of life is the light of God. And therefore, if we want to respect the human person has to be respected as part of light, which is life, which is divine. And that, of course, is a very different notion from the image of God. We had this conversation with Antje, who's on the call, and on the Zoom now, and she tried to distinguish humanity from image of God and what it might be. And I think the prologue to John offers us one possible answer. The human person is part of the divinity or the light of all life, and it's life that we respect rather than just the human person. And it's not that by virtue of the incarnation, now we all share in that divinized humanity, as the quote from Swami Vivekananda might suggest. And as similar quotes exist also in the Christian tradition of God becoming human so that we may become divine. But I think this reading would focus on the power of light and life and a much broader respect, which also then ties into ecological concerns and others. So I hear a slightly different message here, that with different emphases, and therein I hear is where the glory comes. The second point I'd like to make is positioning Judaism. Now, Judaism is a non-incarnational religion. I wrote now 24 years ago towards the Jubilee an essay on Judaism and incarnational theologies, trying to bridge the gap. It's on my academia page, trying to bridge the gap between Judaism and Christianity in terms of the incarnation. But the straightforward view of things is that Judaism doesn't believe in God becoming human, neither for purposes of his being and creation, as would be the case for the Prologue of John, where it's much more than just teaching, it's the being, nor for the purposes of teaching and repairing the adharma, the world falling into moral disrepair, as would be the case for Hindus. Listening to Swamiji, I made a wonderful discovery that's very helpful to me in terms of understanding how to position Judaism in this conversation. I'll share it with you now. Swamiji basically, without putting it in that way, offered us two parallel tracks for recognizing divinity in the world. The one track was the track of the Word, by his focusing on the Word was with God, which he then identified with Om as the foundational syllable that finds expression in everything. And the second thing was the power of incarnation itself, and the Hindu tradition that he drew from the Gita of how incarnation is used for purposes of teaching. So you might say that one focuses on teaching and one focuses on being. Now, while what Swamiji's presentation made me aware of, and this ties to the notion of the light, is that while maybe one sentence just to make this clear. In the various comparisons between what plays a role in each religion, it has often been observed that the systemic equivalent to Jesus in Judaism is Torah. In other words, the tradition of Second Temple literature of wisdom incarnating takes the shape in Judaism of Torah. It takes the shape in Christianity of what we see here in the Prologue to John. With this emphasis, I go back to what Swami said about the sound. And I look at it from the perspective of Hasidic traditions that speak of the fact that the world is composed of letters. There isn't one syllable, but there's the entire alphabet, which then is crystallized in the Torah. And everything is made up of the divinity of the letters that are sources of light. And it is this divine speech that enlivens the world, the divine letters that bring divinity into manifestation, if you will, into incarnation. And this incarnation or manifestation is not limited to the human person. In that sense, I see it much more like how I suggested the Gospel's prologue might be read, rather than just the exclusive focus on the person of Jesus. And if so, this conversation has made me aware, A, of an answer to the question of Judaism and incarnation that I hadn't previously considered, and B, an important contribution to the question of the dignity of the human person that we're talking about. So it goes as follows. In terms of incarnation, what that means that rather than focusing on the person, Jesus Christ, as in the prologue, it would take the track that Swami suggested for Om. In other words, through sound, through letters. So God does manifest, and we can come to the light, and the light enlivens us, but it's not through a person, it's through the Torah and through its smallest units, the letters. This, in turn, gives value to all of life. And once again, the emphasis not being on the human person, but to all of life. And here I see this in line with what seems to me the message of the first verses of the prologue. And therefore, the statement would not be, as I thought this conversation would lead to. In other words, when I conceptualized today's conversation, I thought, let's talk about incarnation as incarnation gives meaning to the human person. Well, it turns out this conversation is taken in another direction. The conversation is taken in the direction of incarnation, now I suggest in all three traditions, being a way of affirming the divinity of all of life and not just the human person, and B, enriching our language so that we don't only think of the image of God, but we have a broader category. And now we have both life in its divine form and light in its divine form as ways of understanding what it means to be human as part of all of creation. This was a message that we heard already from Anand, who was with us until a couple of minutes ago, when he spoke about the fact that all of creation is full of divine life. And therefore, one approach that what I'm learning from David and this conversation is making me aware of also in Hasidic literature, we need not limit the focus on the value of the human person only to the image of God. There are other mechanisms that are not exclusive to the human person, and these to me are found in the text that David shared, in the notions that Swamiji shared, and they go for us through Torah, through letters, through light, going back to Hanukkah, through life. And the message really is we must look at all forms of light as life, as manifestations of divine life, and seek to honor them in that way. And this, to me, may be an interesting conclusion that cuts across the theological difference here and different theological languages and emerges as a very interesting contribution to our ongoing series. So I would be very grateful if both our speakers opined in response to this, and then we move. Then Peter will tell us if we have time for more conversation. We have to move to prayer. But I think this is a moment where I would love both for David and for Swamiji to offer brief responses.
Yes, so if we can keep the responses very brief, and then we'll move into prayer, because all three of you are going to lead us in prayer. So thank you.
Okay, first of all, Alon, you were replacing glory, saying light is more fundamental than glory. I mean, I don't think there's any contradiction between what I was saying, what you were saying, if you go into the rest of John's Gospel. But you seem to be, so to speak, putting the human being within the whole of creation as part of that, rather than, whereas, I mean, what John's Gospel is saying, I am the light of the world. I am the way, the truth, and the life. I am the resurrection and the life. In other words, that the person is actually being identified with the life and so forth, and also with the. I mean, it's
David, I'm fine for that corrective, but it refers to that one particular person, not to all humans.
Yes, but this is one particular person who is wanting to gather up humans in relation to himself, obviously. But glory. I mean, when you say that glory appears once, light appears three times, that's so. I mean, just technically, if you're looking exegetically at it, in the rest of the Gospel, glory is much more frequent, and is structurally the thing. Right in the first sign in chapter 2. Right in the culminating public sign in chapter 11, in chapter 12, glory, in chapter 13, glory. It opens and closes the farewell discourses in chapter 13 and 17, and then in the very final chapter, glory again appears in relation to Peter. I mean, one would have to, argue the case about that. But I mean, I've nothing at all against, what you're saying about light and life. It seems to me that is exactly the horizon which we're invited into, but I don't think that I don't think it has the same effect that you are arguing in relation to the person and incarnation. I think if the word of if the word is made flesh in Jesus, then how do you think? It's not about a baby. If the word is made flesh, human flesh, in other words, somebody is born. Are you suggesting that this is not in terms of a baby? It turns an adult straight off. I mean, the logic. I mean,
I think it's in terms of a person. In other words, I don't see the emphasis on a baby. I see the emphasis on a person.
No, the emphasis here isn't on a baby, of course not. But John is in the fourth gospel. He's assuming that Jesus was born. He has a mother who appears in the gospel and so forth.
That's all granted. I don't deny that. But what I'm saying is that the babyhood of the incarnation, I don't see profiled here in the same way you profiled.
No, it's not. It's not. No, I absolutely agree with that. But there's a baby taken for granted if the word becomes flesh, and the vulnerability, involved in mortal flesh and so forth. That's I had
the honor of being in Greccio, where the first Christmas crib was performed by St. Francis 800 years ago. I was there 2 days ago. So it took 800 years for that babyhood to take on the kind of significance that it has for Christians today as part of Christmas celebrations. It's implicit, it's possible, it's a legitimate outcome, but it may not be there from day one. It may take 800 years or a little less to come to light.
We
Yeah,
have to hear Swamiji's response.
So the light is so important for in the Hindu tradition. They call it the divine light. Even divine word comes from the div dhatu, the verbal root meaning to shine. So the whole thing is shining, and that supreme consciousness, which is light, illumines everything. Is the light to the world, and the sun and the moon and the stars, all of them derive their illumination, being illumined by the divine light. And Hindu philosophical tradition does not distinguish between light and sound. So just like you have anahata dhvani, unstruck sound, which is Om, the mystics have recorded in Christianity too, and in Hinduism, call it uncreated light in the heart, in which you see a divine light. And the beauty about this light is, it is not a light which you see, but you feel you're a part of that light. The question which was just now raised, that the incarnation or the avatara, if you know him to be the light of the world, as the Bible says, then you yourself participate in his glory and light, and you know him fully. The Bhagavad Gita says, those who know me like this, they also participate in my glory and in my light, and in the Advaitic position, they become me.
Wow. I don't know about everybody here, but I know I have gained so much from this remarkable conversation. As always, Alon pulled out such interesting connections and questions, and it's been fascinating for me and very moving. I want to thank all three of you for your tremendous teachings. Praying together in Jerusalem is essentially, and we always finish with prayer. And in our discussion with, no, Alon's going to offer a prayer too. Don't take him away, please. Let's go, he'll go back. In our discussion, and Swamiji, thank you. In our discussion with Rabbi Art Green, we talked about prayer as perhaps the divinity within us. It gives us a yearning, an urge to pray, to reach out and connect with something which is both within and without. And, you know, prayer is a beautiful, beautiful, powerful way of connecting with something that is both immanent and unreachable at the same time. So perhaps I will, Alon, did you have a thought about who would pray first? Do you
Well,
want
let's
to
follow
lead
the
us
sequence of the presentations.
off? Okay, David, would you lead us off in prayer, please?
well, I think I would just repeat that prayer of David Halivni. God and God of our ancestors, reign over all the world in your full glory. Amen.
Swamiji.
This is a prayer that peace pervade the entire earth, the heavens and the waters and the mountains and the plantations, and completely overwhelm all of us. Om Jao Shanti, Antarikshagam Shanti, Prithvi Shanti, Apa Shanti, Oshadaya Shanti, Vishvedeva Shanti, Sarvam Shanti, Shantireva Shanti, Sama Shantiredhi, Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Peace, peace, peace pervade the earth, that wars stop and peace overwhelm this earth.
Alon, do you want to finish the whole event, or shall we hear your prayer?
Let me, can you see my screen?
We can, yes.
So I'm going to follow on the heels of Halivni via Peter Oakes via David Ford. And what I'm going to do, I will go through the prayer that David offered, but in its fuller version. You can see the glory on the screen there. And I have a feeling that I've once sung this before, but I'm going to sing it in a slightly different version, the one that I know from Slonim Hasidim. So this is the New Year's, the Jewish New Year prayer. And as our session today is taking place on the eve of the New Year, I think we can offer this prayer also for the coming Gregorian New Year in its universality. And let me share it then. Eloheinu, Elohei, Avoteinu, Melech, al kol haolam kulo, bichvodecha. Oy, oy, vehi nase, ale kol haaretz, bikarecha. Vehofar bahadar geonu zecha al kol yoshvei al kol yoshvei Hevel aretzecha ve'yedan kol paul ki ata fe'alto ויבין כל יצור, כי אתה יצרתו, כי אתה יצרתו. ויאמר כל אשר נשמה ואפו ואפו. ויאמר כל אשר נשמה ואפו ואפו. אדוני אלוהי ישראל מלך ומלכותו בכל משלה. בום 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 קדשנו במצוותיך ותן חלקנו בתורתך, ותן חלקנו בתורתך, סבנו מטובך, ושמח נפשנו בישועתך, ושמח נפשנו בישועתך. וטהר ליבנו לעובדך באמת, ותאר ליבנו לעובדך באמת, כי אתה אלוהים אמת, ודברך מלכנו אמת, וקיים לנו. בום בום בום. ודברך מלכנו אמת, וקיים לנו. ודברך מלכנו אמת, וקיים לנו.
Kelly, I wonder whether you would mind doing this show everyone, whatever, the gallery view, so we can see everybody who's here. And whether together we can take a moment to just reflect on the beauty of the learning we've done together, the beauty of the prayers we've had together, the privilege that we all have, being able to learn from each other and pray with each other. If we can just take a moment together to reflect on our privilege, and at the same time to take that moment to reflect on and send out compassion and prayers for those who are not as privileged as all of us on this call are. When we come together to learn together and pray together, I think we appreciate how privileged we really are. For those of us who are in a war zone with the tensions, it takes us out for a moment to something greater, to something higher. And not everybody is able to do that. We are able to do that. For those of you who are privileged not to be in a war zone, I'm sure this also elevates your everyday to something greater than the everyday. And that's what we want to do, to be together. And the togetherness is amazing. We already saw it before we began, how diverse we are geographically. We also know we are very diverse in our faiths. And this is something, again, very powerful. So I'm going to ask us to spend a minute in silence, looking at each other and feeling the prayers and hopes for and of each other.